The year 1066 was a pivotal point in English history. It marked the end of two of history's most dominant peoples of the Middle and early medieval ages, the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxon English, led by their newly throned King Harold Godwinson, had gathered as many men as he could muster, approximately 11 to as much as 15,000 men, and had marched vigorously without rest towards the northern English town of York, where news had developed that a large Viking army had invaded and defeated a sizable English army at the Battle of Fulford. The invading host, led by Norwegian King Harold Sigurdsson, known to history as Harald Hardrada, the Hard Ruler, had crossed the North Sea with perhaps 300 ships and 10,000 Viking troops. With him rode Tostig Godwinson, the exiled brother of England's new king, Harold Godwinson. Tostig, driven by bitterness at being cast out and replaced as Earl of Northumbria, had promised Hadrada the throne of England. At the Battle of Fulford, the two earls, Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria, had fought bravely but were overwhelmed by the Vikings. York surrendered soon after, agreeing to meet Hadrada to deliver hostages and supplies. Hadrada, completely unaware of the larger English force which descended upon his position, believed the English crown would be his. He camped his army east of York, at Stamford Bridge, awaiting the English hostages. Hadrada's army had left much of their armor and heavy gear with the Viking fleet camped at Reworked, several miles away, as he was expecting no fight that day. With extraordinary speed, Harold Godwinson, alongside his housecarls and ferdmen, marched nearly 190 miles from London to Yorkshire in just 4 days, a feat almost unmatched in medieval warfare. At dawn on the 25th of September, Harold's army appeared suddenly over the hills near York. Scouts rushed to warn the Norwegians, who were relaxing in the fields by the Derwent, many without mail or helmets, some even bathing in the river under the late September sun. Hadrada had sent a sizable force across the bridge to contest the English crossing. The English opted to not give immediate battle as Harold wanted to negotiate with the Vikings first, particularly his blood brother Tostig. Hadrada and Tostig met with Harold across the bridge. Tostig was offered the return of his earldom if he would turn against Hadrada and join his brother's forces. It was at this point Tostig contemplated the offer, in which he asked his brother directly of the fate that awaited Hadrada and his men. Reports indicated that Harold replied promptly with 7 feet of English ground, as he is taller than other men, implying that both Hadrada and his army would be killed and buried on English soil. As expected, this did not go over well with the Vikings. The signal on both sides was given. Battle would commence. A sizable portion of English troops advanced toward the bridge, aiming to swiftly overwhelm the Viking defenders. The fighting was fierce. The Viking defenders, although heavily outnumbered, put up an honorable defense, cutting down any English soldiers who were foolish enough to find themselves in the paths of their colossal Viking axes. Although they had held valiantly, and the English suffered losses, the difference in numbers was too much to bear. The Viking troops fell one after another, until but a handful were left standing. The survivors opted to retreat across the bridge and form up with Hadrada's main Viking force. Hadrada's men scrambled across the bridge. It was recorded as the English surged forward in pursuit that a single Viking warrior, perhaps a berserker, stayed behind to cover his comrades' retreat. He took a stand on the narrow wooden bridge alone, but unfearful in his actions. The English, in complete disbelief by what they were witnessing, sent but a few men at a time to deal with this lone martyr. They were utterly astounded when the lone Viking cut down dozens of the English soldiers with his large, broad axe. He continued to successfully hold off the English advance for a time, cutting down about 40 men or so with axe strokes. At one point, the Anglo-Saxon housecarls even admired the warrior's skill and offered him mercy to leave the bridge, but he stubbornly declined. The reports indicate that an English soldier crept beneath the bridge in the river and thrust a spear up through the planks, stabbing the lone warrior in his groin, killing him. With the bridge cleared, Harold's army crossed in force. Hardrada rallied his men in a defensive shield wall on a low rise beyond the river. His forces formed into a defensive hexagon-style formation, defended on all sides from attack. Viking banners fluttered. The land waster, black with a golden raven, flew above the king's head. As the much larger English force crossed the bridge, Tostig Godwinson urged Harold Hardrada to retreat back to Reworked, where Hardrada's son-in-law, Eystein Or, was camped with 3,000 Viking troops. Hardrada, a stubborn king, refused to retreat and opted to hold his position. Why he did this was not certain. It may have been because of his sheer stubbornness and ignorant belief in his men's ability to outmatch the English in combat. The logical explanation would be that Hardrada wanted to pin the English in place once a pitched battle began. Then his son-in-law Eystein, who had received word of the oncoming clash via a dispatched messenger, would march northward and flank the engaged English forces. Of these, the second scenario seemed more plausible of the two. This delay on the bridge had allowed the bulk of the Viking army enough time to form atop an elevated hill, which would have given them a slight advantage. As the English closed the distance, the Vikings formed into a shield wall on all sides, making a bold statement that they would hold their ground and fight till the death. Harold's army spread out with the intention of enveloping the Vikings. The heavy Anglo-Saxon troops alongside the elite English housecarls charged mercilessly into the Viking ranks, crashing against their shield wall. The battle was violent. Men on both sides hacked each other to bits. The struggle raged on for hours. Prior to their disembarkment from their ships, many of the Viking troops opted to leave behind their armor as they had not anticipated a battle. Their decision to leave their armor behind left them at a distinct disadvantage. Due to his reckless strategy, Hardrada and his men were now fully surrounded on all sides, with no possible way of escape. They were outnumbered and at a disadvantage due to their lack of armored troops. The only viable chance of salvaging the battle was if the reinforcements from Reworked could arrive quickly enough before Hardrada's men were all slaughtered. Unfortunately, reinforcements had still not arrived yet, and Hardrada's disasterful decision to box his entire force in with no escape had turned out to be his army's downfall. With more men to commit to the fight, Harold was able to rotate fresher troops into the fight, leading to significant casualties to the Vikings. Matters only worsened when a loosed English arrow found its way into the throat of the Norse king Hadrada, killing him within seconds. Hadrada, a towering and fearsome warrior, the last Viking king, now lay dead on the battlefield. Tostig Godwinson now took command of the army, with the death of Hadrada. Tostig's blood brother Harold disengaged his men from battle, and once again offered his brother and the remainder of the Viking host a chance to lay down their arms and surrender. The stubborn Tostig, ever defiant of his brother, refused to surrender. He picked up Hadrada's fallen banner and formed his men back up for battle. In that moment, the decision had been made to fight to the death, as opposed to bow to the mercy of his own brother. Almost the entirety of the Viking army was slain. Only but a few were able to slip through the cracks and escape the massacre that followed. It was at this moment that the Viking reinforcements from Rickall had arrived, led by Eystein Orr. They were unaware of the fate that had befallen Hadrada and his men, so they pushed forward with the intent to give battle towards the backside of the English army. It wasn't until the entirety of the English force turned, formed up and marched toward the oncoming invaders, was it made clear that Hadrada and most of his men had fallen. But by this stage it was too late to disengage. Eystein and his men charged into the now tired and depleted English ranks.
Our hidden units have been discovered!
The relief force from Rickall, under Eystein Orr, were exhausted from running roughly 25 kilometers in full armor to the aid of their king. Needless to say, they didn't put up much of a fight and were cut down. By sunset, the Viking army was annihilated. Only but a fraction of the Vikings escaped back to their ships. According to reports, of the initial invading force which amassed to hundreds of ships that had carried them from Norway, the survivors needed only 24 to return home. The Anglo-Saxon King of England, Harold Godwinson, had achieved a miraculous victory. England was safe for a moment, but as his men tended to the wounded and buried the dead, word came from the south. William, Duke of Normandy, had landed at Pevensey Bay. The king turned his army south again, weary but resolute. 3 weeks later, he would face a new invader at Hastings, and there his fate and England's would be decided. The battle at Stamford Bridge would also see an end to the great Viking era. They would never set foot upon the English Isles again.